So this month, it's the 80th anniversary of the invasion of Normandy, D-Day, which took place in the final years of the Second World War. I've already done a review of Saving Private Ryan, which the opening sequence portrays the invasions of Normandy on Omaha Beach. Therefore, I decided to talk about Call of Duty World War II, which came out about 7 years ago, with an opening mission that takes place during the Normandy invasion. For anyone who's not familiar with the game, I am going to go into some details about the plot, so you'd be warned if you haven't played the game in its entirety. But as far as my history with the Call of Duty series, I used to be really into the games. I was a big history buff, especially with World War II. First time I played Call of Duty was Call of Duty Finest Hour, which came out about 20 years ago, actually, when I was in middle school. I had heard of the Call of Duty games before, and I had played games like Medal of Honor Frontline and Rising Sun, which I actually still have copies of, and some of the levels in this game are very similar to the ones that we see in these two. For a while, about every year, there was a new Call of Duty game. The Big Red 1 edition, which was available on GameCube, and then when 2007 happened, it veered into the Modern Warfare territory. After that, I lost interest in the series because then it started to experiment with zombie Call of Duty stuff. I don't have a problem with any of those things, but for me, it just wasn't quite the same. I had played some of the Modern Warfare stuff, and I think the Black Ops one, which took place during the 1960s, you could probably imagine my excitement in 2017 when this game was released, that this game was a return to its roots. It got a fairly positive reception upon its release, although a lot of people criticized it for being unimaginative and taking a lot of the same tropes that we had seen in other games like this. I think it manages to handle those tropes very tastefully. The gameplay is pretty basic and standard. I'm not a video game expert, so don't crucify me for not understanding the basic mechanics of it all. It's a first-person shooter. If you run out of ammunition, you could pick up certain weapons along the way that you have at your disposal, using your own weapons along with picking up German equipment, collecting first aid kits in certain areas as you progress through the mission. You can also rely on your allies for certain things, getting a first aid kit from Private Zussman or Lieutenant Turner giving you ammunition if you need it. Again, in order to get those things from them, you have to earn it by doing certain actions. Playthrough was a lot harder than I remembered, because it was really easy for me to kind of get lost in certain areas while standing out in the open and getting shot and killed. I think at one point I died at least maybe 8 or 9 times. The thing that really gets me the most is the stealth missions. Certain areas that you have to sneak around, and you don't necessarily have to rely on that in order to beat the level, because you are able to get through it otherwise, but it does make it a lot harder if the Germans spot you. Say for one mission where you have to save this young girl in this hotel in the city of Aachen, and you have to sneak past the German soldiers that are searching the basement. If one of them spots you, it's game over and you have to restart from the last checkpoint. I actually had to rely on the walkthrough in order to figure out how to maneuver around them. I know, I was cheating, but what can I tell you? Because the AI in this game, for the most part, I think is really solid. It's really hard to lock down, especially on the recruit level when you're trying to navigate through certain areas. As for the opening mission itself, which takes place on the Normandy beach, it's not quite as groundbreaking as the opening level from Medal of Honor Frontline, where it was practically ripped right out of the movie Saving Private Ryan. This one does have a similar feel as far as the cinematic storytelling goes, but as far as the actual level walkthrough, it's nothing really that stands out on my end anyway, but I found it to be fairly effective nonetheless. In fact, I think my favorite D-Day level in any World War II video game is from the Big Red 1 edition of Call of Duty 2. The combat itself is actually very chaotic and giving you the impression that you're really in the thick of the battle. Whether or not this is an accurate portrayal of combat, I'll leave that up to the historians and military experts, but on my end at least, I think it really drives the point home and making you feel like you're actually in the fog of war. Particularly in the hotel when you manage to escape from the basement with the young kid, trying to avoid being spotted by the soldiers and seeing how they're getting shot in front of you or blown to smithereens. After a while, I started to go, okay, oh my god. The game also kind of flips you on its head with the gameplay. At one point, you get to drive a German tank throughout the city of Aachen trying to reach Sergeant Pearson and Lieutenant Turner. But at one point, you do have to maneuver around this certain area in order to try to get behind 2 German tanks that are trying to outgun you and outmaneuver you. Similar to the action set piece in the movie Fury, where the Sherman and Tiger tank are trying to outmaneuver each other. While playing that one particular part, I was locked right in trying to figure out exactly how to get behind this tank. First instinct, I fired right onto the front of it, but then I remembered, no, you gotta hit it from behind. That's the weak spot. They always didn't expect an attack from the front, not the back. If you doubt me, just ask the military experts. They will verify it for you. But you also get to fly in a fighter plane above the Battle of the Bulge, trying to provide some air support, fighting off against German fighter planes attacking a bomber squadron that you're supposed to protect. Past experience involving gameplay where you're flying around, it did kind of help, but the controls were really off, and it took me at least a few minutes to get adjusted to it. Back to the Big Red 1 edition of Call of Duty 2, I actually prefer the air combat level in that one, where you're in a B-24 Liberator fighting off German planes or dropping bombs on certain certain targets below. This one definitely serves its purpose, and it's a nice little change up in the Call of Duty series. I don't know of any other examples in other games that have done this before. As far as my experience at least, it was somewhat of a breath of fresh air for me. Also, I couldn't really help but think of certain films that have portrayed air combat like this, such as Pearl Harbor by Michael Bay. Not the greatest example to go off of, but it does have some entertaining fight sequences, as far as the air combat at least. And then there's Red Tails, which was produced by George Lucas. Definitely not a good example either, but the action sequences involving the air combat, once again, top notch. If anything, you could watch that movie for that sequence alone. That's neither here nor there, though. And at one point during the game, we're put into a secret mission, taking part in the liberation of Paris. Once again, this is not unheard of in a World War II video game. Both Medal of Honor's Frontline and Rising Sun managed to do this, where you have to dress up as a German officer in order to sneak into this one pub in Holland. Rising Sun, you have to get a similar thing by spying on the Japanese and figuring out what they're trying to do in Southeast Asia. In the case of this level in this game, you have to sneak around this hotel posing as a German officer, trying to make a switch with a spy within their ranks, planting explosives on certain gates in order for the Allied forces to get in. Having taken a German class at least once or twice before when I was in school, I actually found myself understanding certain words that they were saying in the game. I don't know German inside and out, so don't call me an expert or anything. I'm just saying that hearing some words, I thought, oh yeah, I recognize that. Just a little sidebar here. When Major Crowley walks right over to the desk and you hear him talking to some of the soldiers behind the counter, I couldn't help but go, dude, do not let your British accent slip out like Michael Fassbender did in Inglourious Bastards. That would be really, really bad. But also with that level, you actually get to choose what you say to certain people, because you're given a description of what your contact will be like. It's a German officer in a gray uniform, and that really narrows it down, obviously, because there's a lot of them walking around the building. But you have to say a certain code phrase in order to see whether or not it's your actual contact. I would prefer that way, in order to deflect any suspicion, you ask, hey, are you Major so-and-so? Are you Colonel so-and-so? Oh, no? Oh, okay. Sorry to bother you. Once I was able to find it, and on replay, I actually got lucky on the first try. When you get into that certain area, you ask the person if that's their name, they say yes, and then you say the code phrase. But for that stealth mission, the game also does rely on you to remember certain details, just in case you get stopped by other German soldiers. But if you choose the wrong answer, then it could possibly go south and the mission might fail. I haven't had that experience playing this game, but in the case of that, I do like how the game challenges you to remember those things, rather than holding your hand and doing it for you, so to speak. I'm not really sure what I would pick for a favorite level in this game, but if I had to choose, it would probably be the stealth mission into the hotel. Takes me right back to Medal of Honor Frontline trying to navigate that mansion. And I do like the idea of the French resistance getting the upper hand on their occupiers. Not unheard of, obviously, throughout history, and especially in the case of the Second World War, because as Tim Robbins said to Tom Cruise in War of the Worlds, occupations always fail. History's taught us that 1,000 times. This is our land. Okay, I'm going really crazy right now. There is one big negative for me when it comes to this game. When the Nazis unleash their German shepherds onto you, and you're forced to fight back, why would you make me do that? Just why? The Last of Us 2, along with this one, are the worst offenders in that category. I know there's at least one other Call of Duty game that makes you do that, but even if it's an attack dog, that's it. I'm not talking about it anymore. Leaving it at that, that's it. As far as the game's single-player campaign, this is actually, I think, a really fun Call of Duty story. While I said earlier, it's nothing really that groundbreaking or original as far as what we've seen in other games like this, I found myself fairly invested in the story of Red, who's being haunted by the death of his brother who he failed to save a number of years ago when he was a child. And towards the story's finale, he's in a similar predicament trying to save Zussman when he's captured by the Nazis. Throughout the course of the story, he's part of the Big Red One, and he goes through his first mission by landing on the beach of Normandy. His superiors, Sergeant Pearson and Lieutenant Turner, are at odds with each other because they both see different ways of completing their mission. They both served together since 1942 in North Africa, where a certain thing happened that's been causing a rift between the two ever since. Sergeant Pearson is played by Josh Duhamel, who you might recognize from the Transformers series, and I honestly think that he was a really good choice for that type of character. He's very battle-hardened, tough as nails, doesn't really seem like he cares about anybody, even though deep down he kind of does. And I think Josh Duhamel has the look of a soldier. If you were to show me on paper Josh Duhamel as a soldier, I would say, perfect. Perfect choice. Lieutenant Turner, on the other hand, is played by Jeffrey Pierce, who you might recognize as Tommy from the Last of Us video game series. As far as the other actors, it's mostly a slew of unknowns or slightly known people. Jonathan Tucker plays Private Zussman, who you might recognize from the movie Hostage with Bruce Willis. Not just voice acting, but it's also motion capture work on the actor's part. I actually think that's a lot more beneficial for the world of video gaming, although it could possibly be seen as a setback for some people, depending on what type of roles they're getting. But I actually see that as a positive, especially with the cutscenes, which I never skipped at any point during this game. Because not only was I just soaking it in how great it looked on an aesthetic and technical level, the storytelling I found to be quite effective, especially from the acting and the dialogue. For me, this feels very natural, like something that you would hear from soldiers that are in this kind of situation. Especially as someone who served in the military for 6 years, this, I think, feels like a natural bond between soldiers or people of service. The game also, like with its predecessors, manages to cover a certain number of battle sites, which obviously did happen in real life, not just with the Normandy invasion, but the breakout from Normandy. Then we get to see the Battle of Aachen, which was the first German city to fall to the Allies, the Battle of the Bulge, and the bridge across the Rhine, the Ludendorff Bridge, or what we know as the bridge at Remagen. Oh, and also they show the Battle of the Hürtgen Forest, or the Hürtgen Forest, as we say in German. The hardest levels for me to get through were Aachen and the Hürtgen Forest. City warfare and forest warfare. Different combination of craziness in this one. Oh yeah, to rewind back to the gameplay for a second. When you actually hold a sniper rifle and you're sniping soldiers from far away, you have to hold the L3 button in order to focus and hold the rifle really steady so you can get a clear shot. Kind of makes me feel like Private Jackson in Saving Private Ryan when he's taking a really deep breath and then he takes his shot. Our drill sergeants taught a similar thing in basic training when we were qualifying for the M16. Steady position, let out all your breath, slow trigger squeeze. And at certain points you can refill your ammunition at certain supply points when you hit the checkpoint. You don't always have to rely on your allies. Having both of those things at your disposal at certain areas of the game, it definitely has its pros. But as I mentioned with Turner and Pearson, there's a lot of friction going on since they had a disagreement about what happened at the Kasserine Pass in North Africa, and it's later revealed in the finale before they head to the Remagen Bridge that Pearson wanted to go back and save his men at Kasserine, but he failed to do so, and as a result he got demoted by Lieutenant Turner. Both leaders in their own ways are very tough as nails, but Turner is a lot more sympathetic than Pearson is. Now that I think about it, it kind of reminds me of Sergeant Elias and Sergeant Barnes in the movie Platoon, where they're both fighting for control and ownership of the men below them. Obviously, Platoon takes it to a much more darker psychological level than this one does, but it is pretty clear in both situations where these guys' loyalties lie, as far as the men below them at least. As opposed to Platoon, Daniels actually grows to respect Pearson even if he may not like him that much. And it only gets worse for the guys when Lieutenant Turner bites the big one on Hill 493. Pearson's now fully in charge, and Daniels is his right-hand man. And having to deal with somebody like Pearson who's reeling from the loss of his commanding officer, while also the guilt of what happened at Kasserine, only makes for a heavier burden for Daniels to carry. The thing is, though, I served under a couple of people like that when I was in the military. Maybe not to the extremes that Pearson takes it in this one, but as far as a tough as nails, hard-ass type of person, yeah, I met a fair share of those when I was serving. That was a hard pill to swallow some days. Daniel's facial expression right here, that says it all. But during one of their stealth missions in the Battle of the Bulge, Zussman gets captured by the Nazis. Red tries to go after him, defying orders from Pearson, but is unable to get him back. And when given an opportunity to go home, he decides, at least not right now, to go through with it, knowing that Zussman is probably still out there alive. It's also revealed that Zussman is not only of German descent, but he's Jewish, only making him an easier target for this one German officer that's got a huge bone to pick with the Allied prisoners that he's got underneath him. So they manage to capture the last bridge over the Rhine. The Germans surrender and they search through every single prison camp that they could find. Red finds Zussman just as he's about to be shot by the German officer. Hearing his brother's voice in his head, he spiritually was able to do for Zussman what he couldn't do for his brother. We've seen plenty of arcs like this throughout fiction, so this isn't entirely new or anything. I think in the case of this though, it's done very effectively and tastefully. Now Daniels is able to go back home with a peace of mind knowing that he saved his friend, who now he sees as a brother. And if I'm correct, this might actually be the only World War II game in my experience anyway, that acknowledges the Holocaust. For anyone who's watching, if there are any other examples out there, just tell me down below. Slight nitpick, but I think it does kind of feel Hollywoodized that they managed to find Zussman right before he's about to get shot. It's one of those things where you're kind of put on the edge of your seat, making us wonder, is he going to be able to find him? Is he going to die? Is he not going to make it? Nevertheless, though, the moment where you get to save Zussman from being killed, I find it to be very cathartic. So at the end of the day, Call of Duty World War II isn't exactly a hugely original game, and it's very much similar to what we've seen in other games in this category, but it's very fun and effective, and I think it manages to get the job done, and in some ways, maybe then some, depending on how you look at it at least. If you're a lifelong fan, you may or may not like it depending on how long you've been following the series. For myself, I can't really deny that you got a pretty good game with this one. I don't know where I'd rank it specifically. If I had to rank the Call of Duty games that I played or World War II games in general, I would probably put it in the honorable mention category at least. If anything, I think it should serve as a reminder to this current generation of what the greatest generation went through. It might be somewhat of a glorified lens of what they did during the war and what they sacrificed, but if it does encourage young kids today or anybody who may or may not know the story of what happened during World War II, it might open some awareness of what exactly these guys had gone through and how exactly dire the situation was in Europe when the Nazis were occupying the continent. Speaking for myself, it definitely played a part in my education of the war itself, especially the European theater. If at the very least you're curious about this game, give it a go. So those are my thoughts on Call of Duty World War II. Thank you guys so much for watching. What are your thoughts on this game if you played it? Comment below and tell me what they are, and I'll see you in the next one.